I know someday we could finally be. I know someday we could finally be. I know someday we could finally be.
What is up, everybody? Today we're talking about camera settings and what camera settings you should be using for your outdoor portraits. So if you've ever been frustrated taking photos in direct sunlight, this video is for you, and we're starting right now. Taking photos in direct sunlight can be really tricky, and if you've ever tried it, you know what I'm talking about. So I'm just gonna share a few things with you that I wish I knew 10 years ago that would have really helped me with my outdoor portraits. The first thing is ND filters, or neutral density filters. The way to think about a neutral density filter is basically like sunglasses for your camera lens. There are these circular filters that screw onto the front of your lens, and they essentially darken your image in a way that's not going to distort your color. It's basically going to make everything in your image darker by either a quarter stop, a half stop, a full stop. So if you think of an ND filter as being a pair of sunglasses, why do you wear sunglasses? You wear sunglasses when it's really bright outside and you want to be able to see perfectly, you want to be able to open your eyes up all the way. So an ND filter functions in much the same way, where it essentially allows you to open your aperture all the way up and let all the light in, so you can have a really soft focus, which is really great for portraits, but you're not going to blow out the image, right? So you can have a really low f-stop, like maybe an f-stop 1.4, and with a neutral density filter, you can make the image dark enough that you're not losing that detail, you're not blowing out the image. The second thing is ISO. In this case, shooting outside at higher ISO. Every camera handles noise differently, and the thing that you commonly hear, right, is that like the higher you go with the ISO, the more noise you're gonna have with your image. But something that most people don't realize is that even though going lower on your ISO is giving you a cleaner image, it's also reducing your dynamic range. So what does that mean? Basically, your dynamic range is the difference between your darkest darks and your lightest lights, right? Like your darkest blacks basically and your lightest whites. So by having a lower ISO, you're clipping those whites and you're kind of crushing those darks. And so you have a smaller spectrum of color that you're working with. So a good rule of thumb when you're shooting outside is to try to keep your ISO at sort of a mid-range. So for a lot of cameras, that range is somewhere between 800 and 1200. It will actually give you maximum dynamic range for your sensor. I definitely encourage you guys to experiment shooting outdoors with higher ISO and see the results that you get. You might notice minor noise in the shadows, or you might not, but it will overall improve the amount of color information that you have to work with. So when you put that photo into your editing software, you open it up in Lightroom, you're going to have more range to manipulate the exposure, to manipulate the colors, and you're just gonna have more information there to work with than you would have otherwise. And that, I think, is probably like one of the biggest things that I overlooked in the past, was just this ability to create the maximum dynamic range that your sensor is capable of. So using that little bit of a higher ISO in very bright scenarios is not something most people think to do, but it's an excellent trick. The third thing is your shutter speed. So when you are shooting your portraits outside, you're probably handheld. Most of the time people are handheld. You're moving around a lot. You're looking for those good angles. You wanna make sure that you keep your shutter speed around 1/500. The reason for this is that you'll notice that the lower your shutter speed is, in fact, like as it goes below 1/500, you'll start to see just like the smallest bit of motion blur when you zoom in on your photos. And at 1/500, it gives you that like archival quality sharpness in the photo, even handheld. So you can be moving around a lot, you can be snapping your photos, and you're not going to end up with pictures that have that blur. Or even if your subject's moving around a lot, a 1/500 shutter speed is going to make sure that your photos are nice and sharp. The fourth thing is shooting into the sun. And I know that when you hear that, it sounds kind of like counterintuitive, right? Like if you shoot towards the sun, you're gonna end up with a really dark subject, or the photo's gonna be blown out or whatever. But actually what happens is if you're shooting toward the sun, then that means your subject has their back to the sun, and that eliminates any harsh light on their face, and it allows them to have a nice even lighting across their face, which looks really good on camera. And even if they are a little bit darker, they have shadows on their face, you can always boost those things up a little bit in post, because as we said before, using that slightly higher ISO gives you better dynamic range to play with in post. And so as a general rule of thumb, when you're shooting your portraits outdoors, try to position the subject in a way that they have their back to the light and you're looking toward the sun. Sometimes you get some really interesting blooming or lens flares, and that kind of adds like an interesting organic or artistic touch to the portraits. So if you look at this first clip, the subject is facing the sun and they're getting that direct light. Not only are you getting a lot of hard light on their face, which makes it really hard for the subject to appear natural, right? Because they have like that sun that's just blaring in their face, but you're also having to deal with the shadows from any of the surrounding objects casting onto their face, and that's going to cause a lot of issues as well and sort of obscure the subject. So just as a rule of thumb, when you're shooting your portraits outdoors, always have the subject with their back to the sun, and you and the camera should always be facing the sun. So the final bit of advice is about time of day. If you're going to be shooting outside, the best time of day is going to be that hour before the sun goes down. When the sun is lower in the sky, the lighting is softer. And this is actually one of the cases where if you were in a situation where you had to shoot with direct sun on the subject, for whatever reason you couldn't make it work where you were shooting into the light, that afternoon golden hour light, because it is so much softer, sometimes you can make that work and you can make it look good. So if you can plan your outdoor shoots during those later hours as the sun is softer, you're going to get better results and your photos are going to look awesome. So that's it. If you implement those 5 things, I guarantee you're going to start taking awesome outdoor portraits. And I encourage you guys to go and start experimenting with those right now. If you guys learned anything new in this video, let me know by leaving a comment below, hitting that thumbs up button, and subscribing to the channel. This channel is all about bringing you new and interesting photography and video tutorials every single week. So that's it for me. Until the next one, guys, I'll see you next time.
I know someday we could finally be. I know someday we could finally be. I know someday